following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio, streaming, and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana, and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health using my top 10 sayings for going good crazy. This week, I'm a bit late on this topic because Men's Mental Health Month was last month, but it took a while to sync schedules with a guest, and he's a great returning guest. You may remember Avrum Weiss, PhD, author of Hidden in Plain Sight, How Men's Fears of Women Shape Their Intimate Relationships, from the last time we talked about men's mental health, but he'll be on very shortly to discuss specifically the manosphere and men's mental health. And that interview ran long, so I'm going to do a very brief intro to the topic so we can get right to the good stuff. Men are twice as likely as women to die from preventable causes, meaning deaths related to smoking, excessive drinking, and poor diet. Men are almost 3 times as likely to die by suicide than women. Fortunately, those rates are going down, but men are also more likely to die of accidents than women. And drug toxicity deaths accounted for 2 out of every 5 of those accidents. Now, despite these outcomes, men perceive their mental health to be better than women do. As of 2024, 51.8% of Canadian men reported their mental health as excellent or very good, compared to 44.1% of women. Men were also less likely than women to report fair or poor mental health. And contrary to exceedingly popular belief, men were less likely than women to say they often or always felt lonely. I repeat, men were less likely than women to say they always or often felt lonely. It was a small difference, but they were also more likely than Canadian women to say they rarely or never felt lonely. And that was a significant difference. 53% of Canadian men say they rarely or never felt lonely, compared to 46.4% of Canadian women. Granted, this data didn't include the Canadian territories, just the provinces. That does skew the number some, however. Overall, based on the numbers we do have, men seem to be doing better than women, but end up with worse outcomes. And I mean, the big question there is why? We know that men are less likely to seek therapy and wait longer to start when they are struggling. And we'll get into some of the reasons with Avrum after the break. But that's where the manosphere comes in. Manosphere content is an easy way for men to engage in self-help through pretty slickly produced videos that, primarily teach them that you're not the problem. Various other things are. And again, we'll get into that with our expert, psychotherapist Avrum Weiss, author of Hidden in Plain Sight, How Men's Fears of Women Shape Their Intimate Relationships. He'll be on after the break to educate us. Do you have a story you think would be good for the show? Are you interested in sponsoring the show? Liana at nottherapyshow.com is my email. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. There's a contact form on there, or at nottherapyshow on social media. So it's time. We're going to get into the manosphere and mental health with guest Avrum Weiss on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana. I'm still not a therapist. I am still talking about Men's Mental Health Month, getting in very, very late. But I wanted to wait for this guest. And you'll recognize Avrum Weiss from previous episodes on men's content. Avrum does an ongoing blog on Psychology Today about men's stuff, which is excellent. Avrum does not pull punches. But
that's a polite way of saying it.
Yeah, well, I think that's what works to start, Avrum, is I do find with men, if you do the positive, the supportive, it doesn't work, right? It doesn't land. And so, I mean,
Can I offer a modification of that?
Yeah, sure.
I think it works to the extent you mean it.
That's fair.
What doesn't work is people trying to blow smoke and not really being real
Yeah.
with men or anybody. And then they're offended that the person's, bullshit meter goes off. And they say, well, look what I said.
Right. Yeah. And now there is a certain amount of you don't know me enough to say these sort of positive things
Sure.
about me. You do have to spend some time working, but then you get into the families and you get into where I kind of want to officially start today is this fear, this understandable fear that people have of the manosphere content out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wonder if we can start there because there are good reasons for this fear. What makes the manosphere different from just people like you who just work with men?
Ooh, boy, I would like to think that's not even comparable, but here's the common ground we have. I'll be generous.
Hmm.
I think we both are accurately perceiving the dire straits that many men, the internal pain and suffering that many men are experiencing today. A, I'm listing commonalities first. Differences will take longer. Uh, B, we care about men and want better for them. Um, those might be the commonalities. Uh, the differences are, I think they tend to blame women, and I am extremely careful to not leave any room to be perceived as. So the introduction to my book goes to great lengths to basically say men are afraid of women, but that's not because of anything women did to them. So
Right.
I think that's a fundamental difference. And I think the reason that's a problem is that if you try to improve your own lot in life by focusing on blaming other people, it's not going to go well.
The
So
book
it's not
Avrum
only I
is
think they're wrong.
the book
Sorry.
Avram is referencing called Hidden in Plain Sight, How Men's Fears of Women Shape Their Intimate Relationships for people who want to know. It's like book. I'll say that again later for those listening.
Thank you.
So yeah, the blaming women element of the manosphere is definitely a thing, but there is also real blame on the men themselves. Like I am struck by this content of how much they run down their viewer. Like they
They
go
do
through
it.
this.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
They do
Yeah.
it in a particular way that's important. They do it by suggesting to men that they are feminine, meaning not masculine. And so this is a dilemma that men have to start with. And so they're really, it, if you can get a strong enough fulcrum in an enormous block of granite, you can split so that the split is there. Men experience that dilemma to start with, and they are taking advantage of that split and making men feel bad about themselves instead of a positive message which would be, you know what? Gender is not the most important part of who you are. You have characteristics that we would think of as stereotypically masculine, which is fine. You have characteristics that we would think of as stereotypically. And guess what? In different settings, each one of those are really helpful.
Yep. And it
And you don't have to hate yourself.
even saying gender is not the most important part of who you are is a contentious statement these days. So I want to pause on that because I agree with you. I absolutely
What the
agree with
science
you.
says.
And that is the thing. People can cherry pick the science on gender and psychology to make it say whatever they want these days. They find this one paper that says this, it's a complete outlier, right? You've got 25 other papers that say this one thing. You have this one paper that says, oh no, and tie it into it's also Pride Month here in Canada, I think in the US as well. And so the whole talk, one of the things I notice in a lot of men's content is they immediately start by mentioning, we live in this age of pronouns as opposed to pronouns having existed as a part of speech as long as there's been speech, right? What is it about that? We are obsessed with it as a culture right now when you're absolutely right. Gender, that's something I had to learn. Gender is not even in the top 10 most important parts of who I am.
It's hard to separate the signal from the noise
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because there's the signal of people who experience themselves as gender fluid speaking up, but that is often drowned out by the noise of reactionary right-wing people using that so for example, one of my favorite examples, and I never remember the numbers, I say there are something like 500,000 NCAA Division I athletes, of
Hmm.
whom 7 are transgender.
Yeah.
So really, that's the main topic, and that's how we're going to choose our leaders, is how they treat those 7 people. So I'm not even touching for a moment how we should treat them. I'm just talking about the noise that gets generated. So 20 years ago, it was about gay people. They used
Yep.
gay people to drum up a lot of hatred. So that people became more accepting and tolerant of gay. Oh, we need somebody else to hate. Oh, how about, doesn't matter that there's only 7 of them
Yeah.
because it creates a firestorm, and it's not even about gender or pronouns. And the Democrats, unfortunately, played into it
Hmm.
by making it a bigger, and I'm not saying that it's not an issue. I'm just saying it's 7 kids.
Yeah.
Like, let's try to have a proportional response.
Yeah. And being an NCAA athlete is not a human right either. There's a real jumble of rights versus, surviving versus thriving.
Right.
Right. And I've been hearing from an increasing number of clients that have been persuaded by this content that because there is this discussion of how trans and non-binary people and gender fluid people fit into the world, that the world hates men. And that's not even an
Yeah.
equation. That's not a balance. One
Yeah.
thing has nothing to do with the
No.
other. Other people getting like expanding the pie doesn't mean you get a smaller slice.
Unless you're a very concrete thinker, it doesn't. Um,
And that's very interesting because that's another stereotype of men, that men are more concrete thinkers than others. And we know based on
no,
personality
that's not
tests,
true.
yeah, it's
Let
fairly
me
easily distributed. So go with this,
let me give
please.
you a summary of the science on gender. So there was an article published this year. So a meta-analytic study is a study across studies. So that way you can have more numbers, more people. This meta-analytic study looked at hundreds of studies
Hmm.
on gender versus environment with an N, meaning the number of subjects of 2 million people,
Hmm.
and concluded that gender is overwhelmingly learned, like 90 something percent learned. Okay. Now, I personally find that a little difficult to believe because I have 2 6-year-old grandsons
Right.
who live to play with trucks, and I know their parents didn't put that in them. So I'm not ready to go full bore and say it's just learned, but I think we should at least honor the science and be interested in the same thing is true, of course, about race. If you look at your DNA and my DNA and the DNA of someone of a different race, guess what? They overlap by, what is it,
Yeah.
99.6%, something crazy. So we are overwhelmingly more alike in gender and race. Whatever you think of the science, it's very clear that we are overwhelmingly more, there's more that we have in common than divides us.
Yeah. And as one of those people who never liked typically girly things, I was big into Transformers as a kid, which intersects with the whole truck thing very, very well. But I mean, there is, and this is where we all have sort of an innate personality, which is unique. And then there are those social
Right.
expectations. And that's what seems to be the crisis with I'll separate men and masculinity for the purpose of this discussion, right? Because there's masculinity, what society tells us men should be,
Right.
and that women should not be, which
Right.
is the other side of it.
Of
Um,
course.
and then there's the individual men. And the reason I wanted to have you back on is because I've been hearing more and more and more and more the world hates men, society hates men, culture hates men. And I can understand how, if somebody truly believes that and they're getting it from content, like you said, manosphere creators, I think in their own way, do care about men. They care about their
Right.
money as well, but they care
But
about men.
I'm willing to give them that I think they
Agreed.
genuinely care about men.
Agreed.
Of course,
Agreed.
none of them invited me to be on their show, so I don't really know that. But I'm willing to.
Well,
I'm willing. I
I've
wish they
talked
would. We'd have a great conversation.
I've talked to some of these guys, and they are very driven by their own pain and their own
Yeah. Yeah, I
experience and
get
their own
that.
belief that they
I
overcame
get
it.
that.
So I think that that benefit of the doubt is very useful. But
Yes.
where do you even begin if someone came to you and said, the world hates men or this world radically prefers women? Like, where do you even start with that?
Okay. Great question. I want to take it a level deeper.
Yeah.
One of my favorite studies of all time. So I think what we have to go deeper, we have to look at what is the personal agenda here. Why is this so important to some people? So one of my favorite studies, they assembled a group of people and they showed them they gave them a test, a psychological test that measured how high their level of homophobic attitudes were. Let's say 0 to 10.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then they showed them a series of erotic pictures, some with men with women. You know where I'm going.
I know this study.
Some with men
Yeah.
with women, some with women, and some with men. And wouldn't you know it, the higher your score on the homophobic scale, you just held the pictures of the guys with guys just a little bit longer. They're
Yeah.
just a little more interesting to you. So this is what therapists have been saying for over 100 years, that this hatred is fueled by unresolved. So the fuel that drives homophobia is self-loathing.
Hmm.
And the fuel that drives, I always get the word, but I think it's androgyny is the right word, is self-loathing. And so there is truth to the fact that there are places in the world in which men are treated in an unfair way.
Right.
No question about it. And I would point to my own field as one of the worst offenders. So I have been doing workshops for therapists around the country, challenging them on their lack of training and biases in working with men. And I love doing these workshops. Um, one of the things I do in the workshops is a little provocative, is I ask people, how many of you like men?
Yeah.
Raise your hand. And there are typically about a third of the people in the room who do not, therapists,
Hmm.
who do not raise their hands. And I'm asking them, if I had said, how many of you don't like African American people?
Yeah.
Would you think it was a problem that a third of you who didn't raise your hands are working with African American clients? Why don't you think it's a problem that your countertransference of about men, your hostile, angry, bitter countertransference, you're not dealing with, but you still think you can be a good therapist to men? So I read stuff in my field about men that is so critical.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm on a bit of a crusade to challenge my field to do better. But be that as it may, you still have to live in the world you live in.
Right.
But once you're done
Right.
trying to convince me that the world's not fair to men, of course, my question is, I see what you're saying. I see the truth in what you're saying. Do you want to talk about what to do about that? So I don't think you and I are going to change the world, and you still have to live in this world.
Right. And there's still that two-thirds of the room that doesn't have an issue with men.
Yeah.
And that's what I say. The world is too big for us to comprehend. It's completely fair that you have felt a hostility to men in the part of the world that you have experienced. That's the third of therapists. And yeah,
Yeah.
I've heard some of the things that therapists have said to people, and my jaw drops.
Yeah.
And that brings me to my next question. I wonder if we should take a break and come back to it, because it's about the way men's therapy is presented. It's wrapped up in the bow of domestic violence prevention,
Gee,
safe
why
streets.
would that turn anybody off?
Why would that think there was a bias here, right? To stage men at sort of the beginning of the whole process is, you are a potential threat. You are a predator. I want to talk to Avrum Weiss when we come back on It's Not Therapy, the author of Hidden in Plain Sight, How Men's Fears of Women Shape Their Intimate Relationships, and a frequent contributor on Psychology Today. Avrum, can you hold over the break and we'll come back and talk?
Yeah, Sure.
Right. Awesome. We'll be back with that. Why we make men out to be predators in honor of Men's Mental Health Month, and it's not therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We are still talking to Avrum Weiss. Avrum has been on the show before talking about men's issues. He's the author of Hidden in Plain Sight, How Men's Fears of Women Shape Their Intimate Relationships. He is a PhD. Pretty much everybody I talk to is a PhD if they're not directly affected by an issue. And he's a frequent contributor to Psychology Today. And before the break, Avrum and I were talking about wrapping the stake of men's mental health in the bacon of men are predators. Let's predict violence, the whole Duluth model thing, the power and control wheel, the men are the problem, that I think is what part fuels the psychology field's bias. You go in and you do a Duluth model workshop, which for people who do not know is the idea that violence is gendered. It's about power and control, and they deliberately have all the language be what men do to women, because their primary clientele is men who have had their first run-in with the legal system because they have been charged with a violent crime, usually against a woman. Now, Avrum, I can understand why guys would see this, because now, thanks to the internet, everything's broken containment. Everything is out there for everywhere. I can see men go, see, this is society telling me I'm the problem. What would you say to that?
Well, let's start with some uncomfortable truths. 40% of women are sexually assaulted by someone in their lifetime, which is a number that no matter how many times I hear, I still can't actually wrap my mind. And of course, that's overwhelmingly by men.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. And no matter how much attention we pay to it, I promise you, if 40% of men were sexually assaulted by women, we would have done something about it a long time ago.
Yeah.
So I think we have to start with that very uncomfortable truth. Now, that said, obviously, because 40% of women are assaulted does not mean that the majority of men are predators. That's false math.
Because
So
the
it is
average
not true
predator
that
does it to
Right.
7 different women before they get caught.
Right.
Yeah.
So a great deal of damage is done to men by the assumption that every man is a potential predator.
Right.
So another very uncomfortable truth, which I have certainly gotten a lot of crap for talking about, is that statistically, women initiate violence in relationships more than men do. Now, men are more dangerous. When a man initiates violence, it's more likely to end up with a woman in the hospital. But it's not a one-sided problem. And it's not just that it's unfair to men to talk about it. We're never going to get anywhere with it if we just think about it in victim-perpetrator terms.
Right.
And so unless we understand the dynamics, and I would not very modestly say that men's fears of women are a large part of the dynamics that go into men's violence towards women. Men are terrified in intimate relationships, don't have the coping skills, are largely isolated and without support, and they blow. And I'm not rationalizing or justifying that. I'm trying to understand it. It's obviously not okay. I'm not condoning it. But we can either just say bad boy and punish, or we can try to understand and educate and inform men to have alternatives.
Yeah. I mean, the thing I take a lot of crap for saying is, look, if men are the perpetrators of all this violence, all this bad stuff, then we need to start focusing much younger. And
Absolutely.
and we do see, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the studies where girls are sort of ignored. It's the try hard messaging from the educational system. Boys, we're real harsh with boys
Oh,
in
yeah.
childhood. And I mean, I talk to people, I say, stop telling your kid you're the man of the house, look after your mother at the age of 10. I
Yeah.
mean,
I
people
got a
don't
great I
go
got a
ahead.
great
Yeah,
guess for you.
yeah,
You should reach out to Dr. Judy Chu, CHU,
yeah.
who is the U.S. Congressperson from California and also a psychologist.
Oh,
And
awesome.
Judy wrote a book. You're welcome to use my name. Judy wrote a book called When Boys Become Boys. She spent 3 years in a preschool kindergarten class watching how gender
Uh,
socialization happens in boys, and it is one of the most disturbing books. She tells a story about at the end of the year, the teacher says every kid can lead the class in their favorite song from the year. And this sweet little boy stands up and starts singing a lullaby.
hmm.
At which point, all the other boys in the class give him an untold ration of shit.
Yeah,
And he says, oh, I was just kidding. I don't like that song. And starts singing the Marine Corps anthem. This is a 5-year-old boy
yeah, yeah, yeah.
who already has figured out that there are parts of who he is that are not okay with other boys,
Right.
that he has to hide and lie about and disguise. At 5 years old,
Yeah,
he's already being shaped into a traditional version of who he is
yeah.
and being told he's not okay.
Yeah, and that's the age where it was not contentious to say this until about 5 years ago. But, boys don't want to do girl things because they're boys. They've gotten a sense of themselves as part of sort of of a collective identity. Girls, most girls, I wasn't one of them, didn't want to do boy things because they're girls. And it's the idea of for us, it's that sense of belonging. And when you take away that sense of belonging at such a tender age and push this adult style responsibility on boys, you get stunted men.
Yeah, I
And it's
think
not their
for
fault.
girls, I think I would agree with you for girls. I think it's different for boys, unfortunately. I don't think it's as much a sense of belonging as it is shame. I think it has more to do with, in this culture, we tend to define masculinity not proactively but reactively. Masculinity is defined in this culture as anything that is not feminine.
Right.
Boys are taught to watch out for any sign letting anybody see anything about them that might be perceived as feminine. And that's what happened in that classroom.
Yeah. And you predicted the last kind of bucket I wanted to talk about. So, because shame, we're finally at a point where we're talking about men and shame. This
Mhm.
is something where every time I do a radio segment or I do some piece of content and I talk about men and shame, the floodgates open.
Yep.
But of course, the way it's discussed brings more shame because whenever it's done on the internet, which is the primary place these conversations are having, unfortunately, of course, the internet has a shame economy, right?
Hmm.
The two biggest currencies on the internet are shame and cruelty. And
Wow.
so these guys speak up and they get pummeled with, exactly what that 5-year-old boy experienced in his class. They go back to being that 5-year-old boy.
Yep.
And I mean, unpacking that, you need to face the shame while the shame is being piled on you from external sources. Because let's face it, that's how a lot of interactions with adult women and young men are very shame driven.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that, I mean, you talk about that in your book. Um, and how do we start unpacking this? Because there's a shame of anything feminine, but what's left for a lot of guys is the suffering. There's more and more media. I just played a video game and the most prominent male character lied to everybody, was out to destroy everything, but it's centered in he felt bad about it. And so it was somehow not okay, but a lot of men are really relating to this guy who is a pathological liar only
Right.
out for himself.
Well, let's go back to the beginning of your story about the young man who posts something online about somebody.
Yeah.
When something's bothering you, where do you go for someone to talk to?
I talk privately.
Probably,
Yeah.
yeah, probably not the internet.
Yeah.
So people post things of a deeply personal nature on the internet when they have no one else to talk to. So the problem or the solution to what you're talking about is we have to help build positive, healthy, supportive communities for men. We have to deal with men's isolation because then maybe, I mean, if the internet is a terrible place to go for help for something that's bothering you. And what a surprise that you get a hostile, abusive response
Right. Right.
because you're taking your personal, sensitive, vulnerable business and putting it out to complete strangers.
Yeah.
So that's the problem. It starts right at the beginning, which is we need better alternatives. We need and so things like I agree with you completely about starting with young boys
Mm.
because young boys have very close friendships with each other, and then we sort of force them out of it. And so if we wouldn't do that and let men continue, I can't tell you how many men I talk to who say, I don't have any close friends.
Yeah. Yeah, which is another thing, unfortunately, women get blamed for in the greater discussion, but it's no close friendships among men.
I don't know. I don't even understand how women would be blamed for that, but it doesn't
Well,
make
because
sense
of
to me.
course it's the idea you couple off and your wife is everything and it's women as refuge. And that's what these guys are taught. They have a right to. That's the discussion of men's rights. They have a right to soothing. They have a right to refuge. And all that's true, but not in that way. Like a
I
need
don't
is
even
not a
think it's
right.
true.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't even think it's true. I
Okay.
think you get what you get in a relationship because you earned it. You get it because you gave it. I don't think you have a right to anything in a relationship. It's another human being across from you who has
Right.
their own needs and feelings. And if you want tenderness and support and nurturing it, earn it.
Earn it. And that is a language issue I've found because these guys come to me and they're like, needs. It said I deserve to have my needs met. I have needs. Love is a need. Companionship is a need. Sex is a need. It's needs.
They're right.
Right.
And
But
now what?
and now what? The
Right.
the thing that the manosphere feeds them is that you deserve this, and those no good women are denying you this.
Right. But
Right,
the reason that these men are vulnerable to this is they don't know how to get it.
right,
And
right,
so they're very susceptible to someone, preaching bitterness and isolation as a permanent solution rather than people saying to them, well, here's how to make a friend.
well,
So
these
one of the parts of the book that I am most proud of and happy about is that there's a chapter on how to form a book group with other men to talk about men's issues. Here's where you'd look for guys, here's what to put in the flyer, here's how to start the group. Like, let's start getting a little more concrete with men and saying, here's how you could do it. Let's have churches start to offer men's groups. Let's have schools start to offer men's groups. Let's have therapists, for God's sakes, start to, I recently was on a podcast with a young male therapist who was just such a nice guy and so earnest, and he really wants to work with men. I said, you know what? I will mentor you on how to start a men's group, no charge. Just let me help you do it. So at least there'll be one more men's group.
right. On my Discord server that I run as an extension of my content, uh, I read A Court of Thorn and Roses, the trashy romantasy novel series that sold a bazillion copies because I lost a bet on the man versus bear thing. We tried to argue. I'm on team man, someone else is on team bear. According to the audience response, I lost horribly. Apparently, it makes sense for women to pick the bear. But so I read A Court of Thorn and Roses and I talked about it. And so a lot of my male contributors also read the book and the dialogue that ensued, all these guys reading something written by women for women was it was like a bonding
Yeah,
moment. It was an
yeah,
experience, right?
yeah.
And I think that part of it is not good literature, but there's something so personal about the fear that women have that come out in it. And it was like this new understanding of this is what women are
Right.
struggling with. And we're like, yeah. And because we gender segregate, it really gets intense around the seventh grade, right? And that's when we start to see a lot of these gendered problems start. Girls' self-esteem and confidence takes a
Right.
dump. Men's friendships, well, they're boys at that point. That's another thing we may not have time to get into, the idea that we start treating a 14-year-old boy like a man. They're not. They're boys. You know, the sexual pressure alone, and maybe we can deal with this on young men. You know, we have shows like Adolescence that deal with a 12, 13-year-old boy being called an incel, and I'm just going to pieces about this.
One of
He's
the best
12.
one of the best shows about kids and therapy and families I've ever seen.
Really?
Stunning, stunning.
Okay. Because the crisis it inspired in young men, and we talk about sexualizing teenage girls like a bad thing. We don't spend nearly enough talking about the fact that a 17-year-old boy is still a boy. I mean, when
Yep.
DC Comics a few years back had a gay Superman for Pride, right? It was Clark Kent's son, and John Kent was 17 years old in that book. And the entire storyline was focusing on who he was having sex with.
Wow.
And I was the only person I knew who went, he's 17.
17.
If that were a girl, we wouldn't be going, yay,
Right,
pride. We'd be going, you're sexualizing a minor.
right.
How do we talk to, because at that point they're not a boy yet, it's an adolescence period where they're having these urges, but the emotional development hasn't caught up, and the pressure to have sex to prove something, not because you're in love and you want to be intimate with someone, is more intense than it's ever been, I
You
think.
know, when I was a kid, this is going to sound curmudgeonly, but we had one television in the house and it was in
Yeah.
the living room. So my parents knew what I was watching.
Yep.
They knew what I was reading.
Yep.
They knew my friends. They knew my teachers. And, I did stuff they didn't know about. Every
Yeah.
kid does, but they knew more. They had a pretty good idea. So I know this is ridiculous to say, but unless we start restricting kids' access to social media, we don't have a chance.
Okay.
Um, I was just with, I have two 6-year-old grandsons
Hmm.
and a new granddaughter, but I was with the boys and they're not allowed a lot of screen time. And so I had the experience. So when their parents let them watch, and what they watch is like Magic School Bus, it's not racy stuff.
Right.
They looked like heroin addicts. I
Yeah.
mean, they went from these sweet, adorable kids to like nobody home. It was so dramatic. And there are kids who are plugged into that stuff and a lot worse. Their parents have no idea. So if we don't figure that out, none of this is going to get better. We are exposing children to content that would make me blush.
Right.
They're not equipped. Their parents don't, nobody knows they're watching it. So nobody's explaining to them, people aren't really that way. That's kind of an example. They're on their own,
Right.
overwhelmed by this content. I don't know. I'm not smart enough to know the answer.
Yeah.
But if we don't solve that, none of this is going to change.
Yeah, I mean, that's where you get into the 12-year-olds watching Andrew Tate, which it's the algorithms that are serving these things up, right?
Yeah.
There needs to be some responsibility of the companies with these devices. You gotta let a dialogue happen, but I do think we don't protect boys
Yeah.
when they're young. We're so focused on toughening them up
Oh, yeah.
that I do think that, I mean, the no phones in schools is, I think, a good initiative. You know,
I think
more and
it's a
more
step in
school
the right
boards are,
direction. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But how, two questions. I don't know if there are really easy answers for them. But let's take the boys and the prevention, or the proper building. Prevention, I want to get
Yeah.
away from prevention language because that's part of the problem, right? But how do we build up boys? And then if, these men, because these guys come to me, they're around 30, they're like, I've never had a girlfriend and I'm afraid women are gonna laugh at me and all this stuff. And we know 44% of Gen Z men have no dating experience, so there's a lot of them.
44%?
44% according to one study, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, 44% of the men, because everybody's terrified of each other. We're raising frightened young people. And so, what do you do? How, with all these forces that are tearing men down
Yeah.
and putting their self-worth outside of themselves. And it's this constant comparison of, am I man enough instead of, am I a good person? What's the first step?
The first step is community centers. The one of the most effective demonstrated treatments for adolescent binge drinking, I believe it was in Denmark. Adolescent binge drinking went down by, I want to say, 40% when they set up a series. That's how my first work as a professional was running teen centers. We used to run teen centers. We had ping pong tables, we had pool tables, and we had counselors hanging out, eating Reese's cups, and chatting with kids in the living room. So this is a demonstratedly effective. So kids, and there are adults there.
Yeah.
They're hanging out with each other, but there are adults in the vicinity, as opposed to riding around their cars with no supervision, no one watching,
Right.
no one guiding. So we have to start by building positive communities that now, so if the parents would limit the social media, then the kids would be bored and they would be looking for something else to do, and then they might be interested in. So then, even if you're not dating, hopefully dating would be down the line and hanging out with girls and playing ping pong with girls and doing your homework with girls and getting less scared about being with girls in a normal, healthy environment. And then dating.
It's funny because that's how I first got into peer counseling because I grew up in a, well, you guys would call them African American neighborhoods. It was majority black neighborhood. And so the community centers were everywhere because we know it
Yeah.
works. It's just diversion. Get them in, get them socializing, get them, if they're in the safe place, they're not in the not safe places, but
Absolutely.
you get into the middle class and you see all of that disappearing outside of maybe church groups with people, they don't want the religious. What's going on with secular community organizations for the middle class? Because that's where a lot of the funding's getting cut.
Well, it's not just um, I sometimes when I travel and I stay in a hotel, I think there's 200 rooms in this hotel. There's 200 or more people watching 200 televisions.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
why don't we put a TV in the common area and
Yeah.
people watch a movie? So it's not just what we're doing with kids, it's that their parents are isolated. Their parents don't have friends. Their parents don't know their
It's
teachers.
an
The parents
intergenerational
don't know their
problem.
teachers. And so they're modeling for the kids. Everybody wanted to move to the suburbs.
Yeah.
They did. And they got away from what they didn't like about the city. We can have another conversation about that.
Okay.
Um, but they traded community for isolation.
Yeah.
And people live largely, and of course, social media, so that you don't have to go to anywhere to at least have the idea that you're in contact with somebody. You don't have to get up off your butt and go outside. And so I moved 5 years ago to an island with 1,200 residents.
Hmm.
And I joke with people, the post office is maybe a quarter of a mile away from me. Takes me an hour to go to the post office and back because I see 10 people I know.
Right.
How are you? How was your winter? How's the garden going? I mean, not heavy stuff, but that's the fabric of my life. I sit on my porch, I chat with neighbors.
Hmm.
We get together for pizza once a week. When I was just out of town, when I came back, how are you? How was your trip? I'm known. I'm held in a
Yeah.
nest of people. If I'm sick, people say, "Do you feel better?"
Yeah.
That all matters.
It's wild how when you get out of the suburbs and get into the smaller communities, I did the same thing. I went from very urban to suburban to rural.
Yeah,
And you know the names of the people at your pharmacy. You know the names
yeah.
of the people at the grocery store, the post office. There is a community that the suburbs has just
And I think
gutted.
people are doing that more and more. My impression is that people are prioritizing community in their list of what's important to them where they live.
Yeah. Avrum Weiss, fantastic. Please, if you've got a man in your life, Hidden in Plain Sight is the name of Avram's book, How Men's Fears of Women Shake their Intimate Relationships. I don't just recommend that men read this book. I recommend that women read this book
Can I
as
offer
well.
a suggestion about that?
Yeah.
Because so this is not my idea. This is other people have suggested this to me, and
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea. I have a lot of couples tell me they read the book together in this way. They read chapter 1, and then they don't go on to 2 until they talk about
They talk
chapter 1.
about it. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
then read
yeah.
chapter 2. And it's so illuminating. And women are so hungry to know what makes men tick that it is. On Psychology Today, I have about 55% of my readers are women.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's really, really helpful information. Avrum, thanks for coming back on. Thanks for
My
your
pleasure.
candor and your knowledge. It's going to help a lot of people.
Always a pleasure to talk to you. Keep up the good work.
All right, if you have any questions, comments, anything, if you want information, what's the name of Avrum's book? Can you spell it for me? Just go to nottherapyshow.com, fill out the contact form. I will get back to you when we come back. Brief wrap up on this issue. Men's mental health on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We are still talking, very little time left, talking men's mental health. And the most important thing, guys, ladies who have guys in their life they care about, is to foster open conversation. You don't need to see a therapist, okay? It can be very helpful. Think of it as a help instead of you need it, right? It's not that you're bad crazy. It's just things can be better. But even if you think they can't, talking to someone helps share the load. You deserve better than going through it on your own. People will be a lot less judgmental and a lot more understanding than you think they will be. Maybe not at first. Everybody makes mistakes, but give them a chance. Give yourself a chance. Again, all it takes is one person with a friendly ear and who seems to legitimately care to make what you're carrying around feel less heavy. It doesn't have to be a professional. It can be a friend, a trusted colleague, even within reason, a family member, somebody. Check for, groups in your area, organizations. Send an email. Email me, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. But please just talk to someone. And if someone comes to you to talk, listen. Really listen, because everybody's got something going on. You are not alone. But I am out of time. So if you have any feedback at all, please reach out. Liana at nottherapyshow.com, nottherapyshow.com, or at nottherapyshow on social media. I'm happy to hear it. Until then, remember, you're crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you.